All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be here with Nick today. We're going to be talking about omnichannel approach. Before we jump into things, we're just going to do quick introductions so you know who we are, what we do, and then we'll jump into questions. So first off, I'm Dave Hollander. I'm the Global Vice President of adMarketplace. I'm coming to adMarketplace really within a year now. I come from Google. I spent about 10 years at Google leading teams working with enterprise performance marketers. And adMarketplace, what we do is we work with brands to connect them to consumers who are on a more modern search journey on the open web. So excited to talk to Nick today about different types of journeys, including the web as well as including off the web. So Nick, I'll pass to you.
Thanks, Dave. Hello, my name is Nick James, and I'm the Senior Director at Dick's Sporting Goods, focused on really our apparel business from an e-commerce standpoint. I've only been at Dick's Sporting Goods a little bit over a year. And then prior to that, I spent roughly almost 20 years at Nike Inc., plural, in marketing and product and merchandising and digital strategy. And then I spent almost 3 years part of General Mills, focused on digital marketing and digital products, creating experiences for pet parents. And the reason why I joined Dick's Sporting Goods is really tied to our ethos, which is how do we connect sport within our community and really try to change lives? Because, I think there's some universal truths to certain things that can overcome obstacles and really bring people together. And sports happens to be one. And part of it also is I'm really happy to watch sports and play sports. And now that I have 2 young kids too, there's just a natural connection that I'm able to offer to them, but I'm also able to connect with their friends and help hopefully build a much stronger community where I live through the lens of sport.
Thanks, Nick. So I promised Nick I'd start with a softball question, pun intended. But earlier today we heard from Carrie from Bloomingdale. She talked about really being able to touch and feel the product. For sports, I know that's a big piece about how athletes feel comfortable with their gear, what they're going to be working with on the field or the court. What's something for you that you or your kids absolutely need to touch and feel at Dick's or to get ready for their sports games?
Yeah, I think a couple kind of cool things that I think Dick's Sporting Goods offers we call them athletes. And athletes obviously can be, up to your 80s down, to really like 3 or 4 years old. And so I happen to love golf. I don't get to play a lot. But, if you're golfing a lot of times, especially the older you become and maybe the more serious you become about golf, you really want to get specific in regards to your clubs. And so, obviously going to Golf Galaxy or Dick's Sporting Goods, you're able to try out, for instance, the driver and make sure it gets fit, because based on the angles you hit or how you maybe only drive it so far or the ball trajectory, sometimes you need help. But I think more importantly is when I think of my boys, I just took them up to Boston to our House of Sport. In our House of Sports, we happen to have some really cool experiences. And one of them is called The Cage, where literally a child can go test out a soccer ball, a lacrosse stick. My oldest son loves baseball. And so he was able to try out, I think, roughly like 8 or 10 bats and got to hit in Fenway Park. And so the experience of him thinking like he's hitting in a big league park and then trying other types of bats really helped in regards to his journey and really what fit him. But I think that's what's the cool part about like what we're trying to offer consumers is there is a tactile approach to finding sometimes the right items. And sometimes you need to do that in a physical space.
Yeah, that's great. He hit any over the green monster?
He came close twice.
Yeah, twice. Okay.
Yeah. It's crazy how, and the whole time I'm like, just make contact, because I'm like, it's really tough just to get out of the infield some days. So just make contact.
Yeah, that's great. Earlier we also heard from Sarah at DSW. She was reinforcing we're not going to really change how consumers behave. And so as you think about an omni-channel approach, we know it can be good for companies, but how do you see it being good for athletes or consumers, as you call it?
I think there's probably a couple aspects that come top of mind. One is, I've heard some terms around search and how consumers are thinking and exploring products. I think the evolution of search, as an example, and I know you worked at Google, is, you used to type in something and it would come up. But I think today, when I think of like my boys as an example, they don't type in things. They use audio to search for something. And those things populate, right? And some of it's somewhat what they're being trained when they go to school. And so I think that's really cool and what's unique that consumers have, because maybe my 6-year-old doesn't know how to spell certain words. The other aspect is when we are searching and exploring, I think the fact that now, for instance, you can find out where those items are based on proximity to where you're located. Is it able to be pick up in store? Is it able to be delivered within a day? And then the fact that also, for instance, you can find out ratings and reviews. And another cool thing in the space I play in with apparel is, and I'm not a tall person, is like, how does it look on your body and your figure? And those are simple tools for me to help someone to explore and understand what the product is. And then if you take that a step forward is, well, what are other brands and retailers doing with inside their physical space or their digital platforms to offer similar solutions or services within that space to help the consumer connect the dots? So.
That's great. So a lot of accessibility, convenience, meeting the customer where they're at. Yeah, great. We started talking a little bit more about data in the afternoon today. What data drives your omni-channel approach, and what data keeps it a focus for DICK'S Sporting Goods?
I think data, we had a panel session earlier today, and we were talking about marketing. Normally, it used to be kind of like a 50-50 spread between science and the art. And the question was, well, have we maybe over-engineered ourselves and moved too far, into the science, and how do we kind of find a balance? But I think, a lot of us came away as also from a data standpoint, we normally start with like, what's the baseline? And that stems to the history. And so, when I think about data is obviously history is going to help tell you like the story that you currently played out. But I think what's more critical is maybe what the hypothesis or what the trend might look like. And how can you actually leverage that data to either build a business case or, more importantly, project what the size of the opportunity might be. And through the lens of data, I think what's pretty interesting is, yes, there's first party, there's zero party, and there's third party. I think it's also figuring out like what is the objective of your campaign. Is it around revenue and conversion, or is it around awareness? And I think those type of objectives maybe changes the mindset of where you want to capture that data and how you want to leverage that mix or that modeling of that data to really drive those outcomes that you're trying to aim or target.
Great. Just to take that a little deeper, what are your objectives for DICK'S for this year, for 3 years, on that spectrum?
Yeah. Everything we do is centered around an athlete. So I'm going to say this is sometimes even data might say something. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing for the athlete. So sometimes we might go against a little bit of what the data would say because we want to put the athlete in the curve. My job is really accountable to driving the growth of our business. So I normally look at conversion and revenue as really the forefront of the obstacles and the goals that I have.
Right. And, in your pursuit of that, any best practices you can share either from your experience at DICK'S or before that for omnichannel, or just really meeting athletes where they are?
I think from my past, it's really being clear around your objectives. I think because if you're not clear of your objectives, a lot of times you can spend a lot more time and a lot more money that is probably not needed or required in this space. And then I think we talked about this earlier too, is ensuring when we think about digital spend and digital media is like, have you secured maybe some piloting or some testing to maybe do some experimentation in this space? And I think that's what's really cool around thinking about an omni-channel approach, specifically through digital channels or even physical channels, is you have an opportunity, specifically in retail, to experiment with your consumer. And sometimes those experiments, might be very small, but the goal is how do you find acceleration to either drive something through scale or drive something that has like a really strong emotional connection that has long-term brand equity and sustainability, for what you're trying to bridge or create for your consumer and also for your brand.
Experimentation can be sometimes a little bit of a scary word when you've got big goals to hit. You want to compare year over year. How do you work with your internal stakeholders or your executives to try and make the case for experimentation? Is it data? Is it emotional? Is it something else?
I think that's a good question. I think I think it depends on your audience, because some audiences will react to the emotional aspects to it, like what's their bias and how they feel about it. But I always tell my team specifically is when building in these cases is it's tough to argue with the science, and the science a lot of time is the data, but also understand that the data doesn't truly mean that's the full potential, that's the playbook. And so I think that's where you got to bring in some of that emotional and some of that art to help illustrate the story. And then for me, one simple thing is always like, there's so much data out there. Sometimes it's too much. And so how do you really simplify it? And I like to use a term like, what can you fit on that one page to tell the story? Because that's normally what the person or the audiences can retain. And also more importantly, like, can they all understand what you're trying to tell them? Specifically when you're talking about KPIs and some of the digital complexities, because some of the individuals I'm working with aren't living and breathing it as much as myself in the e-commerce space. They're more focused on the product, or maybe they're more focused on the in-store environment.
Let's take it a little bit back to the athlete and the consumer. You know, things have changed over the last couple of years. We've heard talk today around the pandemic, post-pandemic, pre-pandemic. What new paths do you see some of your athletes on in their purchase journeys, and where do you think that's going to be heading in the next few years?
I think maybe it's not the coolest thing, but I think one of the great things we've been able to really focus on is really the service that we have around delivery. And part of it is based on our store locations, but it's also the accessibility of ensuring, for instance, buy online, pick up in store, that idea of like being able to deliver something within 1 hour. And I use that as an example because some of you maybe have kids and you guys are traveling thereabouts to like a tournament or a game, and sometimes you forget something, or maybe something gets used or something's in the wash. I think it's those simple solutions. I know they're not sexy, but I think, that's an easy way for us to really help, connect the dots with the consumer in that aspect. And then I think the other aspect here is also in regards to like, how are we really communicating our service proposition? And by the service proposition is something around a return policy. A lot of people have started to change their return policies, either shortening it within a tight period of time, or even saying like there are no returns, right? Like you're gonna have to pay a cost. So I think that's a nice way to ensure that we're protecting our athlete, allowing them to call it explore or test that product and understand that they have flexibility in regards to how they want to receive it, or flexibility in regards to, can they return it?
Yeah, so it's the journey before, during, and after the purchase that's really important for the athlete. That's great. Nick, thank you. I think we'll open up to some questions from the audience. I see a few.
Hey, Nick and Dave, great job. Love Dick's. Two athletes in my family. So for you, Nick, with the NCAA changing rules significantly for the athletes recently with the whole NIL proposition, does Dick's, what's your commercialization strategy around that?
Yeah, some of that I can't really get in depth, but we do have partnerships with universities. So, hopefully that gives you an understanding of there is opportunity there in regards to those partnerships, but I can't get in depth like what is the strategy and stuff. But yes, we do work with certain universities in this space.
Hi. Sports has always been considered sort of a man's thing. So can you talk a little bit about how Dick's is looking at women consumers and women's sports? And is that a sort of an opportunity for you to expand your consumer reach?
That is a really great question. I think there's been a lot of momentum over the last probably couple of years, actually, in women's sports in regards to not just participation, because I think that's one of the things that we think about with Sports Matters with our grant, is we want to make sure that all individuals have access, specifically girls and women. I think the other aspect here is you've seen a lot more visibility and probably a lot better brand representation. When we talk about the WNBA and some of the professional leagues in women's soccer, as an example, just like anything, we all should have access. And so we are a big proponent of it. And even before some of these sports took off, Dick's was actually kind of enrooted in some of these communities around giving back. And if you went to like our website today, we have a program around, Gear for Her. So we've built out stories and illustrations of how to support her in this journey through sport. But I'm a big fan of women playing sport. I see a lot of opportunity there in general, but yes, we've been supporting it for a long time.
I'll just add my last Dick's purchase was running shoes for my daughter, so we're definitely seeing it. I looked at DSW as well, if they're still in the room, but yeah, it was Dick's running shoes.
Hi, I'm a big fan of in real life experiences. I like what Bethany was talking about earlier, and there's been a lot of talk. I've seen REI just canceled their whole experiences program, and I'd love to hear your opinion of how you look at something like a run club or a not sponsoring a professional soccer team, but a girls' soccer clinic or the bat tryout events, and how you look at in real life experiences that don't have a click and buy, how you assign ROI to that, and kind of what your approach going forward with that is.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things from the beginning of Dick's Sporting Goods, even before it really was a brand, when it was like, if you think of it, it started as a hunting and tackle store, and then evolved a little bit into some sports up here in Binghamton, New York. Ed Stack, who's our chairman, his dad was big about community and around, call it giving back. And I think how we think about it is this. I don't know if I would stem an ROI to it. It's more about like what's the community impact and the impact that you have there around creating positive momentum in this space, around giving access. And sometimes access means, are we volunteering? Sometimes access, and I think I talked to a couple of you, like I know even where I'm at, like Dick's, will contribute some funds, to help ensure the leagues have some type of health. And normally what that means is it's like gear and equipment, which it's not cheap these days. And then I think the other aspect, down to the NIL stuff is, how is it helping elevate some of those more branded experiences? But I think underneath that is, if you'd go to like our website or any of our stores, is I think we've done a really good job around services and driving those experiences. And so in some of these House of Sports, as an example, like you have a rock climbing wall, or you have an outdoor track and soccer field. And one store up in Pittsburgh that I was at is they had a night where parents could bring their kids, do a sports activity for a couple hours, and maybe go do a movie, right? So it was a way for them to get their kids active in sport, maybe without the screen as an example. And then also nice, maybe a bit of a relaxing moment for that parent to maybe sneak out for an hour or so and just have some one-on-one time with their partner,
Hi, thank you. I love what you were talking about, House of Sports, and I think that's great. And also all the Galaxy programs you have. So I think IRL is really important, and obviously going into the store. But as we talked about, there are a lot of curbside pickup, which is definitely on the rise since the pandemic. How can you capitalize on people waiting in cars, or target them for the future, or as they're sitting there, potentially give them an additional coupon if they spend more money? And what's the percentage right now of people who are utilizing curbside pickup in a given day?
I can't get into all the specifics, but I would say this is, we want to make sure the consumer's happy, the athlete. And so we are measuring that, like how they feel, like the sentiment, how they feel about that. And I would say, it's been a learning curve in general. And based on that learning, I would say the experience keeps on getting better and better. I don't want to project or forecast anything, but for us, it's about the experience and the convenience of that, and that's how we look at it first. And so if we're hitting whatever the goal is, then we're meeting it, and then we're trying to figure out how to exceed it. And sometimes it's not through the lens of promotion; it's just around the health and the wellness of the consumer experience.
Okay, I think those are all the questions. Nick, thank you very much. Really appreciated the talk today.